Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. This week I want to talk about failing. Failing forward, really. I've talked about this before. It's a pretty common term in RPGs and life, I guess. But if you're unfamiliar with it, we're going to go over a little bit what it is. And I want to give a little bit of a warning, I guess, in this video about overusing any good advice as it would be. So let's talk about it. So the concept of failing forward is basically that you don't want any failure that the player characters have to stop the progress of the story. That is to say, a classic example would be you're running an investigation and the players do a search to try to find the clue and they fail. So without this clue, they can't move forward. They don't really get the information they need to be able to make a wise decision. And now they're just floundering. They don't know what to do. You're stuck, right? So in a sense, unless they've got a lot of options, which you should have done in a mystery game, we'll talk about that more, again, you hit the wall. In a dungeon crawl, the example would be they've got to get through this door, they pick the lock, they fail, they're stuck. So what do we do here? A lot of people will say what you should do is allow them to actually succeed, but succeed at a cost. So in the case of the clue, maybe they fail the check, so they find it, but they don't find all the information, or it's more vague, which can be problematic, actually. Or more likely, the person that's guilty sees them see the clue, and now they're aware, something like that, right? That would be failing forward. In the case of the locked door, they open the door, but they break their lockpick, or they make a lot of noise, or they just took too long, and now guards are coming, right? That would be common stuff that people would say are great examples of failing forward. And I don't disagree with this. I think that you can, and maybe sometimes should, although I hate to say should, use a technique like this when you're running your games. But I do think there is one big problem with it. The problem with it is that the DM in all these cases is deciding. I'm deciding that guards are going to come because you failed your check. I'm deciding, me as the GM that is, that your lockpick breaks. I'm deciding that the bad guy now knows you're onto them, even though you may not have done anything obvious to cause that. I am deciding as the DM to push the story forward because I have an idea of what the story should be. For me, I believe in an emergent storytelling game like Dungeons & Dragons or other role-playing games, generally speaking, the story is what the player characters do, where it ends up. They may have a quest to stop this evil force, but they might not succeed, and that might be the story. So to have them succeed so that the story, as you thought about it, moves forward is maybe not the best approach, in my opinion. So let's look at this a different way. In an ideal world, we want the players to push the story forward. So in the case of missing the clue, we can have them look somewhere else or do something else to find the clue. First of all, we've already screwed up in our adventure design if there's only one clue and there's nowhere else to go. But in that case, if they say, I'm going to look on the bookcase for the clue and it's not there, it's actually in the fireplace, well, we can give them the option of looking in the fireplace. We don't have to just say, you look in the fireplace. You can let them do it. Let them instigate it. You don't see anything here. Do you want to look anywhere else? Restate everything else that's in the room. There was this bookcase, but there's also the couch, the end table, and a fireplace. You can do it like this. And that way, again, the players feel like they're making the choice. It's not, oh, you chose A, it's actually B. I'm just going to tell you that it's B. I think this is a better approach in a mystery game. Let them find it through their own effort. And if they leave the room and say, well, there's nothing here after they search only one area, they probably have somewhere else that they can go. Again, that would be good adventure design. If there's nowhere else for them to go and this is where their clues brought them, they'll stop after they can't find that clue and they'll think about it and they'll try something else, right? This is why we want to avoid in role-playing games, especially in an investigation ones, in an exploration, the idea of just saying, I searched the room. What we want to do is we want to ask them how and where they're searching. At this point, too, if they search inside the fireplace and there's a half-burnt letter in there, you shouldn't have had them roll at all. They're looking in the fire. That's where the letter is. They can't miss it, right? So this is another video about hiding successes behind rolls. If we want to do something like that, where we're going to have a success behind a roll, then the thing really needs to be hidden, and it should be something extra. That is to say, the basic clue is easy to find because if they just look for it, they'll find it. But if they really search hard, they might find the duplicate copy of the letter that's not partially burnt, hidden inside the underside, taped to the underside of the desk drawer, right? So if they look in the obvious places, there wasn't even a desk in the room based on my description. They look on the shelf, they look in the fireplace, they see that. If they're satisfied, they're like, we have a clue, and they move on. Cool. But then if they say, you know what, we're going to keep looking, there might be something else here, and they start pulling the cushions off the couch and checking on the drawers of the desk, and then they might find that extra clue. Let them find it. I think that's the important part. We often use dice too much. I'm working on a video on that, so we'll talk about that a little bit later, but to solve problems. If something has to happen anyways, why have them fail and then fail forward? Why not just have it happen? If they have to find the clue, then just have them find it. There's no need to fail forward on the clue and have some additional thing. It's just not that interesting, at least to me. But let me know in the comments below if you think it's interesting. Let's jump over to the door, because that's a very common example that people use. So you come to this dungeon and you reach this door, and you think this door is the way to go. You haven't seen any other ways to go, and you try to pick the lock and you can't. Allowing you to just pick the lock with some consequence is one way to do it, the fail forward way. But what about if you just say you're unable to pick the lock, it's above your level of proficiency or whatever, and then let the players think about it. How else can we get through a door? We can smash it open with an axe, we could kick the lock out, we could use a hammer on it, we could maybe look for the hinges, we could do any number of things to get through this door. Dimension door if you're doing a fantasy game, light it on fire, right? There's lots of ways to get through a door. Why does it have to be picking the lock? And if we say, okay, you can't pick the lock, and then the player says, I kick the door open, now your idea of the guard coming makes sense. The player has now done something loud that would attract guards. So that's common sense, and it's not just you putting something on them. Their actions are what's deciding. If they say, you know what, there's got to be another way in this room, or, you know what, there was an office down there, maybe there's a key, let's go back. Now they're making a choice. They might find a key in that office. If they smash down the door again, there might be a consequence. Why should you decide as the DM that they have to get through this door right now and something's going to happen? Much like the mystery clue, there shouldn't just be one way to get to something. Maybe a final safe or something might be locked, right? But again, there shouldn't be you have to pick the lock. You should have other ways to get in there, and maybe it sets off an alarm. Maybe somebody comes. Maybe it's trapped if they don't use the key. But at least that's a consequence to their action, and not I'm deciding to let them succeed because the story says they have to succeed. That's kind of where I'm coming from here. Now, having a cost for failure is not a bad thing. I should also make that clear. If there is something going on, so for instance, the player characters want to kick down the door, and you're using, let's say, basic expert Dungeons & Dragons. Well, if the enemy hasn't heard them to this point, and they succeed in kicking the door open, they might surprise them. But if they kick the door and they fail, now the enemy hears them on the other side, they can't surprise them, right? That's a consequence of failure. That's not failing forward. You're not letting them open the door. You're just basically having a consequence. Same thing for anything. I want to sneak past this and they fail. The consequence is somebody sees you. I want to try to pick this lock and you fail. Maybe you break your lockpick. And if that is a real option and it could happen, that's the kind of thing I generally like to put up front. I know not every dungeon master or referee likes to do this, but I feel like there's different levels of the game, and I don't need to stay in voice all the time. So if there's a situation where there's a chance of somebody doing something, I usually give the players at least partially the odds if there's a chance they'll know. So if they say, I'm going to try to pick this lock, but it's surrounded by molten lava because it's somehow magical, and I say, well, if your lockpick is in there for too long, it might melt. So I'm going to say if you fail because you took too long and couldn't get it open, your lockpick is destroyed. Now you're giving them a choice. You're not just saying your lockpick is broken. You're saying you can see that it will be broken if you fail. And they could choose to say, Well, you know what? If that's the case, we're just going to kick the door open. I don't want to risk my lockpick. I need it later. Giving the players the choice to move the story forward is key in my mind. So in the end, there definitely should be costs to failure. And I think my biggest gripe, if you will, about failing forward, and it's not even an always gripe, but just a general thing, is because the dungeon master or referee is deciding what happens when the PC fails forward, and they're letting them succeed, you're kind of railroading a little bit. You're pushing the story the way you want it to be. It's fine to say you try to kick the door open and you make a lot of noise and you fail and guards come, because that makes sense. If you say you failed and you kick the door open anyways and the guards come, now it's just because you want them to get through the door. And I know that everybody wants to succeed, or at least that's what your players will tell you and what you think. But as much as it burns when you fail, those are the stories we talk about after. When I sit down and talk to my groups about past campaigns and stuff, it's always the crazy screw-ups or the amazing saves that we talk about. Not the, I open the lock, I succeed. I open the lock, I succeed. So having the lock just be open and they succeed just because the story needs to move forward, but a guard comes, isn't necessarily a burden or a story that they're going to tell. They're going to tell the story when they couldn't open the lock and they had to go back the other way into the office, and they opened the desk and they also found a scroll in there that when they opened it, it teleported them to the moon. And of course, in the fantasy world, you can breathe on the moon. So I would love to know what you think. I know this is a popular subject, so I'm sure we got some opinions down in the comments. So let me know. Also, check the description. You will find a link to my Discord server, which we can discuss this kind of stuff over there as well, and also to my Patreon if you want to support the channel. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.